We have a new topic this week. If you can tell by my beautiful new background, I made a new concept map. Yes, applause, applause. The Cold War. Very exciting. So we're done with World War II. This week, you have 5 questions that I posted. This week, the questions are shorter, right? So I got some good feedback from students last week. Some of y'all said that the questions had too many questions built in, and you said that's too much. So you weren't sure what parts were you supposed to answer. So I hear you. So I simplified the questions this week. So you will know what to answer. They will be shorter. So no more 3 sentences answers. The answers will be more like 1 sentence. Okay, it's clearer. So the questions, there'll probably be more this week, but they're easier, they're shorter, they're more vocab based. So it's stuff that's going to be more about recall, remembering key terms. And then I'm still going to ask you occasionally what you think. So we're analyzing and we're making connections, okay? Which is also very important because that's what you're doing when you do essays, right? You make connections between time periods, okay? An example would be what we did last week when we made a connection between civil rights being limited during times of war, between the Japanese internment camps and Abraham Lincoln censoring the media during the Civil War. Okay? Excuse me, that was a hiccup. Okay, so Tuesday, March 31st. I hope everyone is doing well. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. As people come in, please in the chat remind them to mark themselves present, okay? Okay, so I am presenting. Okay, I'm going to keep this little. Okay, it gives me a little reminder on my screen that I'm presenting. I'm going to keep that up just so I don't screw it up again like this morning. I felt so silly and old. Okay, so here is the PowerPoint for today. Since I'm sharing my screen, I'm just going to show you guys where I got that. So this is our main page, Google Classroom. Under the classwork tab, you'll see for this week, I made a new folder. It says week 2, very clear. In parentheses is our topic, Cold War. You'll see questions 1 through 5. Those are all going to be covered today. You can answer all of them today during this hour. So your classwork will be totally done for today if you came to this live session, which is pretty neat. So there you go. And the materials, Mr. Howard had this idea, and I think it was great to split up the slideshow into Tuesday and Thursday. So that's why it's split up, really organized for your notes, right? So it's very clear what we're covering today, and it's very clear what we're going to cover on Thursday. All right, so we're obviously starting with Tuesday. If you want to bring this up on your own computer, this is how you do it, of course. But I'm sharing my screen, and here it is. So I'm going to present. Now, since you guys are on mute, and I know not everybody can respond to my questions, that's okay. When I ask a question, you don't have to feel like you have to jump off mute if you can't. I understand. So I'm used to, as a teacher, just asking questions when I speak. I might pause to give you a chance to think, to write the question in your notes maybe, or to write something in the chat. But then I will respond to the question after my pause. Okay? So you don't have to feel, I know a lot of my seniors say they can't go on video or they can't take off their mics. That's totally fine, okay? So just because I'm asking a question, you don't have to worry about responding right away, okay? I understand. So we're going to talk about the origins of the Cold War. The origins, of course, means the beginning. So we're starting right after World War II in about the year 1947. Our aim for today: how did the United States attempt to contain communism from spreading in Europe post-World War II? The word post means after, okay? 2 important words in that aim are the word contain and the word communism. All right, the word contain means to keep within a space, so it does not pour out, so it does not affect other areas. All right, our do now, take a look at the picture above. Who are the only 2 world powers remaining post-World War II? Why might this cause conflict? So we have two world powers remaining. On the left, we see the US flag, the American flag. And who is that icon? We've seen him many times. We've seen him in the Uncle Sam poster, right? He's the one that has been encouraging us to join the military, right? Okay, so whenever we see this image, Uncle Sam, we know that it's going to be about the U.S. Okay, so here he is representing the U.S., often the U.S. military. Okay, and then in the other square, we have a bear in front of the flag of Russia. Okay, whenever we see a bear, we know that bears often represent Russia. Okay, and we know that the color red is often associated with communism. Okay, now the last part of that do now is asking why might this cause conflict? This is one of those questions that I love because it's asking you to think and try to make connections. So when we think about the US and Russia, just start thinking in your mind what makes those two places after World War II so different. Okay, and those details are going to become clear as we keep talking. Okay, so the slide doesn't actually look like this. I just made this map very big because we're going to go over this map before we do the slide, all right? Because it's really important that we understand this in order for the lesson to really make sense. Okay, so this is a map of Germany in 1948. Okay, so I'm getting 1948 just from the side, the little description. Okay, you'll see that it's divided into West Germany and East Germany. So Germany today is no longer separated like this, right? We just have one unified Germany. That's pretty recent. Okay, so in 1948, we had West Germany and East Germany. So you'll see West Germany has the Western Allied countries, and they're represented by their flags. So up at the top, the flag that's crossed, red, white, and blue, that's the flag of England, right, of Great Britain. Okay, at the bottom, the three vertical, red, white, and blue, that's the flag of France, and then there's the American flag at the bottom. Okay, for East Germany, we see the flag of the Soviet Union, Russia, that red flag. So East Germany is communist. It is controlled by the Soviet Union, Russia. West Germany is a democracy. It is capitalist. Okay, and it is controlled by the Western Allied powers. So these two sides butt heads, right? They do not get along. So I want you to notice that in East Germany, there is that little pool of blue. That is the city of Berlin. Now, I know we haven't talked a lot about Germany outside of World War II, but I'm sure we've all heard of the city of Berlin, right? This major international city, a major cultural, intellectual hub of Germany. Okay, so even though this major city was in East Germany, it was divided itself into East and West. So just like Germany as a whole was divided into East and West, the city of Berlin was itself divided into East and West. This would be like if the United States was divided into the Eastern United States and the Western United States, and then they took New York City, and even though we were in the Eastern United States, they said, you are going to be divided yourself. So there were capitalists who were living in a bubble of a free society amidst a communist country. Okay, so for people living in that blue bubble of West Berlin, within the communist country that was controlled by Soviet Russia, they had problems. Okay, the communists were constantly interfering with the fact that the Brits, right, the English soldiers, French people, and Americans were in the middle of Soviet-controlled territory. So let's see what's going to happen. Oops. Now I will shrink back down this map. Okay. Yes, so if you are following along with your classwork questions, this slide is going to address question numbers 1 and 2. And after the slide, I will give a minute for us to pause and go to them, okay? So just start thinking 1 and 2. So let's pay attention to our key terms on this slide. Our key terms are in red. The first is the Yalta Conference. So this is the conference that split Germany into Allied occupied areas. An occupied area means an area of the country that is controlled by a country that is not there, right? We see these 4 areas very clearly in the map that I unfortunately just shrunk down, but we see the 4 flags, right? None of those flags are German, right? We see the British flag, the French flag, the American flag, and the Soviet Russian flag. Those are the 4 Allied countries that were occupying Germany. So at this time, the Soviet Union is controlled by a dictator named Joseph Stalin. We talked about Stalin as part of our World War II unit. He was on our previous concept map, okay? Stalin blockades West Berlin from receiving aid. So West Berlin is that blue bubble in the midst of East Germany, the communist territory. Okay, so like I said, the communist government is going to try to stop the Western democratic allies from surviving in communist territory. So what's one way that he's going to do that? He's going to blockade West Berlin from receiving aid. Blockade is exactly what it sounds like. It's to block a space from receiving what it needs. So a great political cartoon is going to show up in a YouTube video, and I will pause and show you an example of Stalin's blockade in a little bit. For now, all you need to know is that on land, there was not a way for the Allies to bring aid to West Berlin. So countries could not bring in food and medical supplies. They had to come up with another way. And if you cannot go by land, what is another way? Their solution was our second key term, the Berlin Airlift. During the Berlin Airlift, US airlifts supplied through Soviet blockades to the people of West Berlin. If you look at this little cartoon down here, okay, so actually, let me get out of this and make this one bigger. Boop, boop. Here we go. Okay, so here is Stalin. Stalin is the man with the mustache, and he is usually depicted having that hat with the red star on it. Okay, so he has East Germany on one side, West Germany on the other. And there he is in his blockade. Stalin's blockading West Germany. And he is saying, no, you cannot enter. And what are the Allies doing? They're saying, okay, whatever. We will go in the air. Okay, a really amazing solution. And we're going to watch a cool video about it. I don't want to say, it's one of the early, I guess, events of the Cold War. It's really, it's just a cool story. So here's a great video about it, and it's also going to talk about a lot of the sacrifices that were made. There were deaths and some of the first casualties of the Cold War.
One of the first major incidents during the Cold War became known as the Berlin Airlift. What was the Berlin Airlift, and why was it carried out? At the conclusion of World War II, Germany was divided into 4 portions: the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union.
So I'm pausing right here to show you Germany divided. Okay, this is the answer to class question number 1. So if you're following along, I just want to make sure that this is as productive as possible for everyone. So I'm just going to quickly go to this. What was the result of the Yalta Conference? At the end of the Yalta Conference, what did Germany look like? Your answer is da-da-da-dun. Would you like me to pause at that for a minute, guys? Okay, I will pause at this for a minute, okay? This first bullet point is actually a really great answer, but remember, you're putting everything in your own words, so please do not plagiarize that exact bullet point, okay? Also, remember, turn your question around in your answer. So a good way to start would be, the result of the Yalta Conference was that Germany was divided into, for example, all right, I'm going to press play.
Each controlled one segment. The city of Berlin, which was located in the Soviet sector, was also split into 4 similar segments. The Americans, British, and French portions joined together to create West Berlin, while the Soviet region was known as East Berlin. In 1948, the American, British, and French regions of Germany announced that they would be creating and using a new currency called the Deutschmark. This would replace the old German currency known as the Reichsmark. In response to this decision, the Soviet Union halted all traffic between East Berlin and West Berlin. They also severed all communication.
Do you see the star on the fence? That is the same star that is always on Joseph Stalin's hat. You see that image repeating itself.
With the non-Soviet sectors of the city. Supply trains.
So this is the cartoon I was just referring to. This is an image of a bear, which is always associated with Russia. And this particular bear is supposed to be what political figure? Stalin, right? We know because he's wearing that hat. Okay? And this to me kind of looks like Stalin, I guess, as much as a cartoon bear can. It kind of looks like he has the beard and mustache. Excuse me, guys. And this is a physical blockade, right? He is blocking. He gets to control who is coming in, what these people get and do not get, okay? And he is going to use that power for evil. So, like I said, the Western Allied powers, they're going to have to come up with a solution.
Were turned around, and even the electricity was cut from West Berlin. Since Berlin was located 100 miles inside the Soviet sector of Germany, this meant that the non-Soviet region of Berlin was completely isolated and in a hostile territory. At the time, this region of Berlin had enough food to last about 36 days and only 45 days worth of coal. By June 24th, 1948, West Berlin was completely cut off from the rest of the world and surrounded by 2.5 million Soviet troops. On June 25th, the U.S., Great Britain, and other allied nations decided on a response. It became known as the Berlin Airlift. The Allies began flying planes into West Berlin, each one carrying loads of supplies, including food, coal, and other necessities. At first, progress was slow, but before long, fresh supplies were flowing into West Berlin by the minute. The Soviets were helpless to stop these flights. If they had opened fire on the aircraft, it would have been considered an act of war. So the planes were allowed to land, supplying West Berliners with the essential items and food that they needed. By April of 1949, the Soviets realized that their blockade effort was futile. And finally, on May the 12th, 1949, the Soviet blockade of Berlin came to an end. Even after the blockade was lifted, the Berlin Airlift continued for several months, lasting a total of 15, with countless planes landing in Berlin. At the airlift's conclusion, the American and British Air Forces had combined to supply the city with over 2 million tons of supplies. There were 101 deaths caused by crashes during the airlift, and these deaths became the first casualties of the Cold War. The cost of the airlift was $224 million. However, most believe it was a small price to pay to secure the lives and freedom of those in West Berlin.
That was a really long last shot. I don't know why we had to watch that man walk to the plane. Okay. I copied my favorite map over to this slide too. Okay, cool. All right, so we're on slide 4 if you're following along on your own computer. If you're not, we're back up here. Okay, so this is another way that East Berlin and West Berlin were separated. This way was actually physical, okay? So there have been a few actual physical structures, walls, right? We can think of the Great Wall of China, okay? This is another physical barrier that has been created. This is the Berlin Wall. These are actual photos of it at the bottom that I think are pretty moving. The small one at the bottom of the person trying to peek through, because there I'm sure were little cracks where you could maybe see the other side. In general, they did not want people in East Berlin, in communist Berlin, to see the people in West Berlin. Now, my question to you that I want you to think about for the rest of the lesson, okay, I don't want an answer now, is why do you think the Berlin Wall needed to block people from East Berlin from seeing West Berlin? Why do you think this physical structure was so important? Okay? Why was this construction so important? Why was it necessary? Get into the mindset of a communist leader who wants to protect East Germany, communist Germany, and communist Berlin. Okay? Think about, were both sides of Berlin equal? Did some people have things on one side that they did not have on the other side? Okay? So the Berlin Wall, which lasted from 1961 to 1981, was a wall to divide East and West. When it fell in 1989, that signified the end of the Soviet Union, which was communist Russia. So Russia exists today. It is no longer the Soviet Union. It is no longer a fully communist state with a dictator. It has a different type of government, different type of economy now. Okay, so while we think about that question, we're going to watch our second video. This video is a little bit longer. I want to go here just to show you guys question 3 before we watch the video. Henry, by the way, I don't know if you're on this chat, but I love that you have already, or I love that Henry has already gotten going with these questions. Great. Okay, so this question is, why do you think Stalin wanted to physically separate people living in East Berlin from the people in the West? And then I just gave you some thought questions, okay? So while we watch this video, be thinking about this, all right? And then we can pause and I can give you guys a few minutes to answer. All right, this video is a little bit longer, so I'm only going to interrupt it a few times, but it is very entertaining. So I'm going to full screen and let's just give it our full attention, okay?
The Berlin Wall, 1961 to 1989, the Cold War. The Berlin Wall would become a symbol of ideological division and suppression of human rights during the Cold War. It represented the Iron Curtain that separated Western Europe and the Eastern Bloc. In August 1961, the communist government of the German Democratic Republic of East Germany began construction of the wall and placement of barbed wire between West Berlin and the East. Its purpose was to stop Western fascists from entering the socialist state of East Germany and stopping defections from East to West. It would continue to do so until November 9, 1989, when the East German regime announced that its citizens had the right to cross the border when they wanted. The wall goes up. When World War II came to an end in 1945, the victors came together at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences to split Germany into 4 Allied occupation zones. East Germany would go to the Soviet Union, while the western part went to the United States, Great Britain, and France. Even though Berlin was located entirely within the Soviet part of the country, the city would be split into 4 sectors in the same way. The Russians were determined to remove the United States, Britain, and France from Berlin. A Soviet blockade in 1948 attempted to starve them from the city. However, the United States and its allies resisted by dropping food and fuel supplies from aircraft, which became known as the Berlin Airlift. The booming Western sector, which was the showcase of capitalism, contrasted sharply to the economically poorer East. Many
So that gave us one way that the East and the West were different. In the West, they said they were capitalists and they were building things like cars and they had factories and manufacturing, right? They had a big economy. In the East, they did not have a big economy. The people were very poor. Okay, so that's one difference that we can be thinking about.
German refugees flowed from the East to the West, including highly skilled workers such as doctors, teachers, and engineers.
So the people in East Berlin, in the communist part, who were very smart and got lots of education, ended up moving to the other part, to the west side, in order to work and have a better life. So even like the smartest people that had the most education in the communist Berlin ended up getting out.
Between 1945 to 1961, 15 to 20% of the East German population had left to the West. Premier Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union, had had enough and gave the East German government permission to close Berlin's borders for good. On the night of August 12th to 13th, 1961, East German soldiers, the police force, and volunteer construction workers laid down barbed wire and a cinder block wall, which stretched over 100 miles. As the decades went on, the wall developed into a more sophisticated one, featuring a series of tall concrete walls, electrified fences, fortifications, and watchtowers.
What does this look like, my friends? This is a prison. These people could not leave their country. They were trapped. This was a corrupt government trapping its citizens. Okay?
Escaping East Berlin. Now people would no longer be able to cross freely with ease to go to work or shop, as they had done before. Now, in order to get from west to east, they had to pass through border crossings. The most famous were checkpoints Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. But there were several other border crossings. Which checkpoints or border crossings could be used also depended on nationality, dependent on whether they were West Germans or foreigners, or a status such as military personnel or diplomats. West Berliners or West Germans, as well as foreigners, could apply for a visa to get into East Berlin. East Berliners and East Germans, however, were not permitted to cross the border to West Berlin or West Germany. In October 1961, U.S. Chief of Mission in West Berlin, E. Allen Leitner, was stopped in his car by East German police. This prevention of access for American officials to East Berlin caused a standoff between American and Soviet tanks, which faced off at Checkpoint Charlie. For many hours, both sides stared each other down, waiting for their enemy to fire. The potential for World War III was eventually averted when President John F. Kennedy contacted Nikita Khrushchev and convinced him to withdraw his tanks. The American tanks also backed away soon after. Armed soldiers patrolled the wall and would shoot anyone on sight attempting to escape. Ditches, barbed wire, guard dogs, searchlights, and minefields were also set up to prevent escape attempts. Buildings overlooking the wall were demolished or had their windows bricked up so that people could not escape by jumping from them. At least 171 people were killed trying to cross the wall, but this...
Did you guys hear that? That they had to put blocks on the windows because people weren't... They wanted to stop people from committing suicide? That's how miserable the people were, that they were willing to run and get shot, killed dead, trying to escape rather than stay in their country? These were refugees, right? These were people fleeing poverty and corrupt governments, just like people continue around the world to flee corrupt governments and poverty.
This didn't mean that escape was impossible. Hundreds of East Germans tried to escape across the wall, including by flying in a hot air balloon, by zip line, on a tightrope, in a car without a windshield, by swimming, and through a tunnel. President John F. Kennedy visited Berlin on June 26, 1963. He made a speech known as Ich bin ein Berliner, referring to himself as a Berliner in spirit, as a way of ensuring that the United States would fully support West Berliners and Germans. This would be a big morale boost, but while President John F. Kennedy protested, he realized a wall was better than war. On June 12, 1987, U.S. President Ronald Reagan arrived in West Berlin for its 750th anniversary celebration. In his speech at the Brandenburg Gate, he challenged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall. The fall of the wall. On November 9, 1989, with the Cold War thawing, and political changes happening across the Eastern Bloc, the East German government announced that all GDR citizens could visit West Germany and West Berlin. Günter Schabowski, the East German communist official who was the unofficial spokesman, had announced a new freedom of travel for East Germans to the West, in that they could apply for visas from the state agency in an orderly manner. In an unprepared interview, after not having all the information, he said to journalists, "We have decided today to implement a regulation that allows every citizen of the German Democratic Republic to leave East Germany through any of the border crossings." And when asked when this would take effect, he responded, "According to my information, immediately, without delay." From this interpretation, thousands of East Germans gathered around the checkpoints and the wall, creating a party atmosphere.
So these people just learned that they were free. So let's see what they do.
Then the crowd of East Germans crossed the border and climbed onto the wall, celebrating with West Germans on the other side. People knocked down the wall with hammers, and soon with the help of bulldozers, it was pulled down. The reunification of East and West Germany was made official on October 3rd, 1990. Subscribe to our channel for more.
All right. Another very cool story. So there's real footage of when the wall came down. The president, the U.S. president, was President Ronald Reagan. So maybe you guys have seen the footage of Ronald Reagan asking Gorbachev to tear down this wall, referring to the Berlin Wall coming down. And he's standing in front of it, and it's a cool clip. I will find a good version of it and post it to our stream tonight. Okay? So we have one more slide and then one more video. All right, so we have a lot of important key terms on here. They will come up again on Thursday, but they're important for your notes. So depending on how you're taking notes, this is going to be an important slide for you. All right, the first one we talked about on our first slide, containment, preventing the extension and expansion of communism would be a better word. The Iron Curtain is not a physical barrier like the Berlin Wall. The Iron Curtain is the term for the division between communist Europe from democratic capitalist Europe. Okay, democratic capitalist Europe, of course, was Western Europe, and communist Europe was Eastern Europe. The Marshall Plan was economic aid from the United States to Western Europe after World War II. The Truman Doctrine was economic aid from the United States to Greece and Turkey post-World War II. And NATO was a multinational organization designed to contain communism. It is a mutual defense organization. Mutual defense means that if you have my back, I will have yours. If someone comes for you, I will attack them on your behalf. Okay? So we're going to watch a video that goes into a little more detail about the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. I'm going to set 30 seconds on this slide, though. I know some people are still writing. I'll wait a little bit, okay? All right, if you need some more time to write, you can open up the slide on your own after the session. This is our last video, and then I will answer some questions.
On March 12, 1947, President Harry S. Truman gave a speech that would mark the beginning of the Cold War, a period of tension between democratic powers in the Western Bloc and the powers in the communist Eastern Bloc that would last.
Just pointing out again, we have the Eastern Bloc associated with communists, and we notice its color is red. Our Western Bloc, which is democratic, and its color is blue. Here it looks a little purple, but generally it's blue, right?
Last more than 40 years. Let's take a look at what gave rise to this directive, Truman's famous speech, and the lasting impact of his doctrine. Immediately following World War II, tensions between the West and the USSR were already on the rise. Recovering European countries were in political crisis, with large factions within them supporting their nation's communist political parties. The Soviet Union supported these communist factions, desiring to expand their influence in Europe. But the United States, along with its wartime allies, wanted countries to set up governments committed to free market economies and supportive of democratic governments. American and British political leaders believed that nations with constitutional self-government would foster economic prosperity and deliver them reliable allies in trade, commerce, and war. This was on the mind of Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, when he gave his Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri in 1946. In it, he condemned the Soviet Union's oppressive power in the East. However, the lines between communism and democracies were not always clear-cut. In 1947, tensions in the Mediterranean made that clear. Greece was engaged in a brutal civil war between a nationalist Greek army supported by the United States and a communist militia fighting for a new democratic government. This internal conflict made it vulnerable to the political influence of other countries. The U.S. feared that the Soviet Union would step in and support the communist war effort in Greece, ultimately influencing Greek policy. Meanwhile, the USSR had been trying to expand influence in other parts of the Mediterranean, putting a lot of pressure on Turkey in particular. See, at the time, the Soviets wanted to drill for oil in Iran, but to get that oil out of Iran, they had to use Turkish waters. So the Soviet government pressured Iran into granting them oil concessions right near the Turkish border, while trying to get Turkey to grant them a military base and transit rights through the Turkish Straits. The United States government didn't want the Soviet Union to control the Turkish Straits, which offered both military and economic advantages. For this reason, the U.S. and its allies sought an anti-communist Turkey. American diplomats concluded from Russian interest in Turkey that the Soviet Union was also supporting communists in Greece, just west of Turkey. Nonetheless, American diplomats feared a domino effect, either from a communist...
So a domino effect, one of the keywords for the Union, it's on this chart. Oh, it's way at the top, is domino theory, okay? A domino effect, of course, when you hit the first domino, what happens? It hits the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. Pretty soon you've hit all the dominoes, even though you just tapped the first one. So that is what the U.S. feared would happen with communism. If one country falls to communism, the neighboring countries will fall to communism, and pretty soon, much of the world is communist. Okay, the U.S. foreign relations policy in this whole era and for the remainder of the 20th century is largely going to be an anti-communist platform.
Victory in Greece, or a Turkish concession to Soviet interests in the Straits. So when Truman addressed Congress on the crisis in the Mediterranean on March 12, 1947, he described a solid communist threat across the entire region. Truman's speech called for immediate military and economic aid, $400 million, to Turkey and Greece.
I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressure.
He was careful not to explicitly mention the USSR, but the warning against the Soviets was clearly implied. To convince the American public to support such a broad commitment to the fight of communism, Republican Senator Arthur Vandenberg urged the president to overstate the crisis and scare the hell out of the American people. This not only marked a definitive move against the Soviet Union, it was also a shift in U.S. foreign policy. For the first time, the United States became financially involved in countries outside of the Western Hemisphere. As the first definitive Cold War speech, the Truman Doctrine served as a prelude to the Marshall Plan, which would extend aid to all of Western Europe. The doctrine emphasized the virtues of a free market economy and the defense of the Western world against communism. It also established an interventionist trend, setting the precedent for American involvement in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars.
All right, an interventionist trend. What does it mean to intervene? If you intervene, you come between, right? Oh, and I missed that request 20 minutes ago, Emmanuel, to make the cartoon smaller. Oh, I'm sure I did it, right? Oh, Henry Garcia. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading your chat now. Okay. Yeah, so, sorry, intervention strategy. So the last point he was making was sending all of this aid to countries to help them rebuild after World War II was really an effort to help these countries be strong enough to protect themselves against the threat of communism. Okay, this was not just aid in good faith to help build up other countries. It was to help build up other countries so they could all protect themselves against communism. Okay, that's intervention, when you come between. And it definitely set a precedent, according to the video, for interventionism down the line. A precedent is when you do something the first time, and then a pattern emerges and it happens over and over again. If we look around the world now, do we see the US military engaged in a lot of international conflicts and events, and do they have a lot of roles overseas? Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely do still have an interventionist strategy. Okay. I'll keep the recording going for questions. Does anyone have any questions about 1 through 5 on the classwork for this lesson? 4 and 5 are multiple choice. So I didn't pull those up, but are there any questions?
No, I don't got no questions.
Why are you laughing?
I wasn't laughing.
Okay. Is everyone good? I mean, you sound good. You sound happy, so. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Yes, you could. Okay.